Welcome to our podcast. I am here to welcome Dr. Maria Sophia Aguirre, the president here at Catholic International University. She is a professor emerita of economics at the Catholic University of America, with over 30 years of teaching, research, and academic leadership, including directing programs, launching master's degree, and serving as a Fulbright scholar. Her expertise spans international financial markets and economic development, and she has represented the Holy See and the United States as major international organizations. Dr. Aguirre has testified before Congress. She served as an advisor to the President and Secretary of State for 2 U.S. presidential administrations and collaborated globally on projects improving the lives of millions. She is also the founder of Integral Economic Development, an approach that emphasizes the family and social relationships as essential drivers of economic well-being, work she continues to advance today at Catholic International University. Welcome, Dr. Aguirre.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. It's long overdue to have you in the studio. One of the reasons that you are here in DC is because on Monday you were a part of a side event at the UN. The event was called Better Together, Solidarity Rooted in the Family. Can you tell me more about that event and just what it was like being invited to such an incredible international event?
Well, as you know, this week is the week of the General Assembly, which means all the leaders of a state, different states go to the UN, meet at the UN. And parallel to this activity, we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of the first year of the family, which was in 2005. Because of that, the Republic of Turkey, who is chairing this year one of these committees, hosted an event to highlight the importance of the family for development and solidarity. And so as part of that, 2 scholars were invited to speak, and I was one of them. So the highlight was several states announced the different policies that have been implemented or will be shortly implemented regarding family well-being, such as special benefits in taxes, which are not small, right, to encourage families to have children, especially in Europe, such as in some of the Arab countries, facilitating women's work in outside their home, etc. But anyway, the important thing was the highlight that, you know, what you walk away from this event was that many countries around the world realize that protecting, supporting, and really encouraging families, healthy families, is something that is fundamental for the sustainable development of economies.
That's so amazing. It's amazing that we're thinking about that. As a United Nations, you had mentioned that the First Lady of Turkey, she gave the introduction, and it was really beautiful. So tell me about that.
Well, she really highlighted how happy they were that they were the chairs, and therefore they had the opportunity to invite these fora. And she also highlighted the importance, again, as I was saying before, of supporting, of encouraging, right, and protecting, really, the family in all countries around the world, but especially to strengthen solidarity across countries, within countries and across countries, in a time that needs it.
Tell me more about that. What does solidarity look like, as you said, across countries on a societal level, and how do we work towards that as a people?
This is very interesting, right? Because we are at a time, we just need to look at our recent history in our country, right, where solidarity is lacking. The capacity to converse, to engage in a civilized manner is lost. And where we are facing around the world wars, political unrest, And therefore, to bring forward solidarity in this context is extremely important. Now, what is, I think, an interesting question is, where do we learn this? Right? And that's where the family comes in. If you think about a family, a stable family, mother, father in a stable relationship, and that's something that was clearly defined at the side event at the UN, as the minister from Hungary said, well, that's in our constitution. That's what the family is. So in a family is where you really learn basic habits, virtues that are fundamental for society. From conflict resolution, you have to come up and resolve things with your siblings, with your spouses, right? Conflict resolution, trust. How could you have a society without trust? And where do you learn to be trustful? Is first within your household. I think a child, right? A child that is thrown in the air by the dad and captured back with security, that creates a lot. And what I'm telling you, this is science, actually. It sounds like a nice story, but this is backed by, biological studies, neurological studies. So all these things that seem so small are huge when it comes to thinking basic habits that human beings need to be able to live in society. And we need to live in society because we cannot survive otherwise, right? We are relational by nature. Think about basic civility, thoughtfulness about others, the whole understanding of what it means to love, respect another. All the things we learn it in the home, or we don't learn it. And one of my preferred ones is, where do we learn to be polluters? People are so concerned about wasting. Well, you tell me where you learn to be wasteful, right? From how you take a shower, with how you fold your clothes and take care of the things you have, or how you don't throw away food. I mean, these basic things are learned in the context of a home. And so one of the interesting messages coming from an economic point of view is not only the structure, but how we live in that structure of a home is not value neutral for economic purposes. It's fundamental. Either we live in a way that is efficient because it's in accordance with our humanity, or we live in a wasteful, toxic environment, and that is not good for society.
Yes.
Right? So, and therefore for the economy. Now, you were asking me why. So that's the connection with solidarity. I think that is clear. But on the top of that, think about what is the role of the family in an economic structure. Well, when we think about economy, what do you have? You have resources, you have production, you have exchange, and you have distribution. Those are basically 4 operations that every economy has, right? You need resources. If you don't have the resources, you cannot do anything else, right? Well, one of the fundamental resources are humans, what we call in economics human capital. Well, across science, across history, right, and cultures, we know, when you look at the data, that children that come from stable families, mother, father in a stable relationship, are able to study better, to concentrate better, to communicate better, to work better. They learn how to work with an ethics of work that is good. And all that comes from the family. Wow. So if we want human capital, we better support the family. Wow. From policy to education to every aspect you might want to think of. We need social capital, because when you don't have social capital, what happens is what we call the transaction cost increase. Think about it. If nobody respects the law and everybody expects to be bribed, that increases the transaction cost. Right? If you have to be double checking every transaction because you don't know if they are cheating, then the transaction cost increase. That means we are adding costs, unnecessary costs, to the operations in the economy, which means then it's not sustainable, right? It's more costly, it's wasteful,
Wow.
it's not efficient. And so the social capital in an economy is very important. Think about this. When I arrived to this country, we're talking about now, I'm aging myself, almost 40 years ago. One of the first things that struck me was I arrived with a box full of papers, all legalizing, right, showing that everything that I said was true. Well, when I came to my first job, they looked at my box and they said, "What is that box for?" And I said, "Well, these are all the legal stuff." And he said, "Well, we don't need that. You wrote it in the CV. That's it." The assumption being that in the United States, the default was you said the truth, you follow the law. And what you wrote was it.
Wow.
I was coming from a country that you needed to prove every word you said because the assumption was you don't say the truth, right? We have to double check on you and think about the transaction cost, the cost attached to all that.
Right. Wow.
Unfortunately, we are at a point in the United States that this is becoming norm for us too. And that increases the cost, the transaction cost, a cost that is not necessary if people were to live virtue.
Wow.
So social capital, human capital, and then you need moral capital. Why do we need moral capital? For what I just told you. If you don't have an ethical behavior, then every transaction becomes, again, a complicated transaction in the economy, more likely inefficient because you have to double check and get into all these other transactions to ensure that the transaction is a correct transaction, if I may say. And so that, again, introduces a lot of inefficiencies in the economy. So, and we are only at resources. Now let's move on, right? We need exchange. For exchange, you need goods that you need to produce. For production, again, you need human capital. So you need the resources. But for production, we need human beings also, right? We already know the AI will not quite do for us, right? You still need people who are able to think critically, to make decisions efficiently. And for that, you need humans. And for that, you need people who are able to carry out those operations. Well, what we know is children that come from stable families have a better capacity because they are better developed psychologically, right? I mean, and as a whole, they have a sense of who they are. They have a sense of belonging and identity and all these important components of a personality that makes you able to make the right decisions at the right time. Dialogue, right? I mean, all these things we learn, again, at home. And so when we think about resources, a key important resource is not only, the material resources, but the humans who will make those material resources be used well, right? Efficiently. And third, you need exchange. Well, because if you produce wonderful things, but you cannot sell it to anybody, right? We need exchange, right? Barter, as Adam Smith used to talk about, for an economy and for us to meet our needs. Well, for that, you need social capital because if not, again, the transactions become more expensive, etc. And so, again, if you have pirates, right, then jumping into your boat, then that increases the cost of transactions, right, or transportation, etc. So we need it once again. Where do we learn all those things? In the basic unit of society, which is the family. And then we need the right distribution. And this is my preferred one because I always say that's where the women excels, right? Who knows your son, one has to go to the doctor, the other one needs shoes, the third. I mean, that's normally the women. The role of the women in society place is, I would say, especially distribution, right? So the person who needs it gets the goods. And so again, you need the family is key for that, because again, if the family is a wasteful family, the distributions in the economy will be wasteful too, right? And so, as you see from an economic point of view, the family is an essential component of the economy. And when the family begins to crumble, so does the economy.
That's amazing. I love just it seems to me that the whole thought behind this is let's create confident, capable, and virtuous citizens
Correct.
to lift up an economy. I think of last year during the campaign, the presidential run, I read J.D. Vance's book, and he was raised by a single mom.
Correct.
And at one point in high school, he ended up moving to live with his parents and or his grandparents rather. And he described that experience as prior, when I lived with a single mom, I felt dumb. I thought I was dumb. I didn't know if I was going to get from, middle school to high school. And then he said, I moved in with my grandparents and there was this structure. There were two people there. There was meals that I could rely on. And all of a sudden, I'm making A's in my classes. And now he's the vice president of the United States. And so I think that's a representation of exactly what you're saying.
But I think it's also representation in another important thing, right? Of course, I'm talking when I describing the importance of family structures and so forth. Of course, I'm talking about on average, right? Exceptions confirm the rule, because we are not determined by our environment, right? But we are highly influenced by our environment. So I think Vice President Vance can be an example of that, right? It's a person who should have been a statistic and instead became a vice president of a country and performed very well. And why? And that also speaks to the fact that, thank God, in society, we do have the family as the core, but then we have other extended families and we have other levels of society that can, in a subsidiary manner, complement, enrich, right, others, community, etc. So that's where you see, again, one more time, the fact that we are social by nature, right, that we are not self-utility maximizers as we typically think in economics. And that's to the core, right? That speaks to the importance of the family. If you really think how we make economic decisions that are efficient, is we are efficient when we act as who we are, which are social beings, right? And therefore, when we make our decisions, it's not all about me. It's about me, my wife or my husband, your children, right? I mean, your parents, whatever is the dimension of your life that you engage in. But definitely, to make decisions as a self-utility maximizer is extremely inefficient and, in fact, not sustainable for an economy. So it is precisely when you think of you and your community, whatever, again, whether it is that community is your family, the most basic one or extended one, is when you really make decisions in an efficient manner. And that leads me to another thing, which is fascinating. That's where you see the family is so important. How do we maximize? Really, who are we, these economic agents who are human beings? How do we go about this? Well, first of all, we are intertemporal, right? If not, no person will take a loan to be educated or take a loan to buy a house, right? The very concept of a credit tells you that you're maximizing, not right now, but intertemporally.
Wow.
But this is also a very important thing, right? Because if you are in a context, if you grew up in a context, as you said, you didn't know if you were going to be able to eat. That capacity that is so important for human nature, for a person to think intertemporally, goes away, right? If you think about it, one of the big characteristics of a poor person is that poor person has to make many decisions every day about the most basic things in their life. How are they going to eat? Who is going to cover their health? These are basic things that you and I wake up every morning and not think about, right? So poverty itself reflects the problems that exist when the person cannot live in a way that is appropriate to their dignity and their nature. It's very fascinating, right? So we maximize intertemporally. Second, intergenerational. Right? The moment you stop thinking about the future, the economy collapses. That is called aging population. And where do you learn to be selfish? At home.
Yep.
Huh? You learn to be selfish at home. So the fact that we are in in fact, the societies, if you think economic-wise, is not it goes along, right? Societies are structured in an intergenerational manner, right? You have children, you have parents. That's the next. Why does a state has anything to say about family and marriage? Because those are your next generation of citizens. So it behooves you to protect them. That's the only reason why. And for the economy, it's key. So when you think about intergenerational, you also are thinking about Social Security. Well, if you don't have enough children, and practically the whole world has pay-as-you-go systems of Social Security, means you cannot support the elderly. At the same time, there's another reverse to that. If the elderly are not part of a life of a home, what does that do to the human being? Where do you belong? What is your path? What is your culture? All these things are part of the life of the economy too. And if you take that away, then you are impoverishing the capacity of a person to act as an efficient economic agent.
Wow.
Interpersonal, intergenerational. Very important, right? And finally, relational, interpersonal, right? That goes beyond just your family structure, but now goes into your neighborhood, the polis, as Aristotle's talk about, right? So, of course, the household, the economia, that's where the name comes from, right? It is the most basic, but that is not operating in isolation, right? The family alone cannot survive, right? It's the most basic, but needs more. And so when you think about these just basic things, you realize, wow, if we want to seriously talk about sustainable growth, sustainable progress, sustainable development, or whatever way you want to describe sustainability of an economy, you must talk about family, or who are we kidding? All right, I mean, it's the most basic.
Absolutely. That's amazing. And it's interesting to me because I feel like we live in a world where we want to separate personal life and then our, political life. And as you're describing, it's impossible, right?
We
because
can't.
it's the foundation of the society. So tell me, how does this economical thought, how should this impact policymakers?
Well, this is extremely obvious, right? I mean, as a policymakers, something that I mentioned at the UN, just to wrap up there, I was saying, to think about family is not only responsible, it's smart, and it's fundamental. Because if we don't, as policymakers, if we don't take into account the family, not the individual, the family, then we cannot possibly develop effective, efficient, and sound policy, right? Because again, what we will end up otherwise, one of my preferred things I always talk about, well, women needs to go to work, great. And children, therefore, needs to be taken care of. So our solution is childcare. So now what we found 10 years or 20 years into these policies, women was stressed. The children were not well taken care of, and the men didn't know what to do with themselves. So why do we end up in these inefficient points? Because we should have asked, first of all, the parents what they needed.
Wow.
Let them decide what their path is.
Wow.
Right? Instead of we decide what their path should be. And also to remember that that subsidiarity principle of the social doctrine of the church that is very much supported by economic analysis is we go bottom up. So let's begin by the household, the community, whether our churches or community centers or whatever it might be, and then start going up the scale all the way to the state. Let's don't begin with the state. That's not how we are made, and that's not how the economy works.
Yes. Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like, as you said, since we are looking at it from a state perspective, it creates this hyper individualism where, like you said, the mom is going to work over here, dad's going to work over here, kids are in childcare over here. And it's like, when do we come together? When is that unit even truly established, and how can it flourish in that setting?
And that has so many other consequences. Think about flexible schedules.
Mm-hmm.
Think about, I so many times women come to me and say, well, Dr. Aguirre, how have you done it? And I always tell them, there is no one path. It depends on the needs of your household, of your family, and definitely where many times the professional path of men is linear. For a woman, it's never linear, among other things, because we do have children at some point in life. 99% of the women around the world experience motherhood at some point. And therefore, it makes sense that their path should be different. And so to try to define an economic model that does not acknowledge that is just a losing proposition, and the data is there to show it.
That's a good point. I wanted to ask you about that because, there are so many different needs and so many different families and so many different ideologies. Like, we live in a very tribal time where people have very strong opinions on either side. How do we build up this family unit with so many different perspectives?
Well, let me say this. The family is what it is. We can try to redefine it and change it. And the family is a mother and father in a stable relationship. Now, it's also true that we experience more and more higher levels of divorce, single motherhood, etc. But I always say it's common sense to realize that we cannot make policy on outliers. We do policy in what is solid, right? And the solid thing is mother, father in a stable relationship. That's across cultures and across whole history. So that's our point of reference. The other one, any other policy, should be supporting outliers to get us close to that reality that we know is best for the citizen and for the economy. So what I mean with that, certainly, and we saw that in the famous study from the University of Chicago when at the time of Reagan was that it says, wait a minute, our social welfare is fostering social welfare dependency. It's better for a woman to have children out of wedlock than to work.
Wow.
Well, you know what? That's not good. As that study from the University of Chicago clearly stated. So that's where I mean that when we do policy, we should be doing policy in a norm, not in outliers.
Right.
And therefore, any other policy should be supporting behavior that helps solid families, right? Not foster otherwise. And that comes through tax policies, right? We should not be penalizing your third child. We should be encouraging it, right? Within marriage, which is what is happening with our taxes right now. Right? In a way, we are imposing, population growth policy through numbers, through fiscal policy. So, or we should not be fostering single mothers to have children out of wedlock, right? Because that's another thing. When you look at the statistics, and this again, what I can say about the United States or any other country in the world. I done studies, extensive studies on family structures and economic growth around the world. What you see is consistent. Who is the poor? Who is the one who, in a sense, becomes a burden on our fiscal, reality? Well, it's a single mother, right? A single mother. Those are the poor, 99% of the time. Right? Who are the second poor? Cohabiting. It's very interesting. Right? And who are the ones who use the least the social welfare systems? The married couples. And by the way, the more children they have, the less is the probability of using welfare systems. Where people always say that children make you poor. Well, what the data shows is not the case. So it's very interesting. And that also makes you realize why the poorer you are, the more important it is that you are married and in a stable relationship. If you remember a little bit ago, I said how do we human beings maximize? One of the characteristics is we maximize intertemporally. We are intertemporal human beings. Well, you tell me, if you are not married, why would you think intertemporally? You don't, right? That's precisely why you don't get married, right? That's why you cohabit, for example, right? You don't want a commitment. Yeah. If you make the commitment, now it's for life. Now you begin to think intertemporally, you begin to maximize intertemporally, and therefore you use better, more efficient your resources. Wow. Well, the poorer you are, the more important it is that you use your resources correctly. Because you don't have too much to waste. You have none, in fact. And so family structure becomes, even if it's always important, it's even more important, if you may say it that way, when you have scarce resources.
It's amazing. Everything that you're describing, it reminds me of the Bible verse that says, he who finds himself is he who gives himself, right? Is how you find yourself. And I find that everything that you're describing shows that if we want to create a society, we have to encourage individuals to engage in a polis, in a family.
Correct.
Because like you said, it's the foundation. And so
and engage with a vision of the future, right? Not to be afraid of commitment. Right. And again, where do you learn? Why would you be afraid of commitment? Because you had a bad experience with commitment, right? Now, what I think is extremely important, and that's why divorce is such an important issue, right? I mean, it makes, divorce, economically speaking, the economic loss of a divorce is almost at the size of the Great Depression. It's estimated to be between 33 and 45%. It's extremely high. And people talk about the shadow cost, right? I mean, divorce is bad, but the shadow cost, makes it worth it. Well, look at the consequences that come after, and you wonder. Now we know that shadow cost is even more costly, right? Because of the impact that have in children and commitments, etc. And so what I think is very important is this is not a religious issue. I'm talking about from an economic point of view.
Right.
And I don't bring religion into the middle, although we can, because we also know, right, that human beings are transcendental. And one clear characteristic is the intergenerationality we have. We transcend ourselves, and we also transcend ourselves spiritually, and therefore we cannot leave religion out, right? Like religion helps the normal development of a child because it responds to its nature. We are transcendent by nature, and economically that also shows. Yeah.
Right. It's interesting. I mean, most of Catholic social thought is established through the thought of Aristotle, right? Aristotle was not Catholic, he was a pagan. But even when we look at other religions, they are seeking out and finding the same truth.
Absolutely.
And part of that is even just through observance of what you're saying, which, you're coming from an economic science point of view where that truth is prevailing, despite the fact that it's truly objective and material, the data that you're looking at.
Let me give you another example. Well, first of all, let me say something. When I began to do this research, for me, what was amazing, as you said, I'm economic by training. I don't know biology. I don't know. right? No basics. But what for me, what was amazing is the moment I began to do research, I began to realize that across sciences, you see a consistent message, and that is family is key for health. Family key is for poverty. Family is key for education, no matter what the science is. And I think it's very interesting because it speaks to the fact that our basic unit and the natural way, again, throughout history and throughout cultures, where the child grows and develops in a thriving way is within a family that is stable. So this is across science. And just to give you another idea, a couple of years ago, I did a study on opioids. And what caught my attention in the middle of all this, opioid crisis that we had in the United States was that everybody talked about insurance and poverty levels and access, but nobody talked about family structures. So I decided to look at a longitudinal data, national survey of consumption and income, as we call it. Most of the countries is called family. Guess what? 57% higher probability of you being addicted to opioids if you experience a family disruption. Insurance was not significant anymore. Level of income was. Level of education was not. So what you see there is that because we forget to take into consideration how family structure plays on this, we miss all the boat. And not only that, but we can develop bad policy because we don't look at something so essential as family structure, right? So, and it was very interesting. I'm never going to forget. I was presenting this paper in an international conference in Rome, and in the way to the airport, I'm in the Uber, and the Uber driver, what does he do? He works in addiction problems in a rehab in Maryland. And so when he was telling me this, I said, I have this basic thesis. What do you think? And he said, this is absolutely true. And we often don't do it. So the state spends $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 to help this person who is suffering of addiction, but never brings the family into the equation. And so they go back into the same problem and they fall again. So bad policy. Simply poor policy, poor treatment, poor misuse of funding. And so this is just one example, as can give you many, on what happens.
Because that's so true. And I was actually just listening to something on this, and it was talking about how, our government programs for rehab centers, exactly what you're saying, they prioritize sobriety, and instead of diving into the trauma and therapy and creating a structure, a system, a belief system, a value system for the addict. Whereas if you look at the Christian-based programs like AA or something, they have such an amazing success rate because they're creating a community, they're creating a family, and that's the basis of their treatment program.
Correct.
So that's amazing.
And this is fundamental.
It's fundamental. So when you were talking about divorce earlier, it kind of hit me a little bit. It probably should have hit me sooner, but it hit me a little bit that, marriage is the foundation, right? Because you can't have a family without the marriage, right? And so, and as you said, divorce rate is increasingly high. It's increasing every year. How do we build up marriages? How do we create?
I think this is a great question, because unfortunately, I think we are in a situation socially wise that cultural wise, I should say, we are in a situation cultural wise where many young people don't know what marriage really means. And that's where you realize one more time how important it is intergenerationally, right? To learn from others, to broken families if you come from a broken family, it helps you to see families that operate, right? And that's where you see the important role of families in society also is give example and provide that healing. What does it look like? And a family that is normal, that right, that thrives, as opposed to perhaps an experience that is otherwise. Um, and I think that talking again around the world, I have the gift of having been able to travel around the world and meet people from many, many different paths of life. What you see is that the important healing role in society of strong families. Mm. And often what happened, the families that have come from broken families or families that are not broken, but for all practical purposes, they are, right? He might have or she might have everything on the books except parents to talk to. They might, for all practical purposes, they are abandoned, even though they are not, quote, abandoned, right? And so those children typically go to, they like to spend time in the homes of their friends where that exists, right? The warmth, the family warmth exists. And that reminds me of something else I tell you, you find in the statistics. It's not the same to come from a family that is divorced than to come from a family where the one parent is a widow or a widower. There is something very different into that dynamic, right? It's not the same your parent abandoned you that your parent passed away. Two different things, right? In your emotional development, in the dynamics that it creates, etc. In both cases, you want the extended family to make up in a way for that, right? That's where the grandparents are important. That's where the siblings are important and so forth. But because you need a role model. But that being said, there's something that I think speaks loud in the psychology and child development literature when that distinction is made, and you see it in the statistics too. But what I was saying this is because you begin to realize that we need to show the young people in the way we live, what does it look like, right? And thank God it's still in society because we are humans, many families that are very good. And very good is not perfect. Nobody is perfect. And that's part of the conflict resolution we learn, right? I mean, to resolve things because we all make mistakes. We all need to ask for forgiveness. We all need to forgive. We all need to understand. And you learn that in the family. And to show that, right, we cannot underestimate the power that healthy families have in society, precisely because they transmit, they educate with their lives, which are messy, right? It's not perfect. They transmit to others who do not have that, the way of living, right? Learning, teaching how to live, and therefore how to operate efficiently in an economy.
That's so beautiful. As you were talking, you were talking about the abandonment, whether it's emotional or physical. There's so much abandonment in families, and I wonder if it's a lack of courage. A lack of courage to lean in and see your child and be there for them. Because they're there and they need you, and somehow, whether it's emotionally or physically, so many people abandon. And I wonder if it's a lack of virtue, a lack of confidence.
That's where I think that our fast-paced, highly invaded by technology has not helped us, right? I mean, in many ways, as somebody who lives, has most of my blood family is in Argentina, technology has facilitated immensely being in contact with my family in a much more regular basis. And so you can see there's a positive way. of technology, but also it's very sad when you walk into a a restaurant and you see mother, father, and the child, sometimes 2 years old, 1 year old, all of them in the phone instead of talking with one another, right? Or with the TV on, and people around in their home, but they are with one another, but they are not, right? They're isolated in their own world of the phone. And so that leads me to another issue. One of the variables that I often find very significant is the number of dinners that households have as a family. That's one variable that I can tell you always comes significant. The higher the number of meals that the family has as a family. So the quality is as important, right? It's not only how many times you eat together, but really eating together, conversing with one another and paying attention to one another. And so when I have traveled the world speaking to policymakers, testifying in Congress, parliaments, etc., on these issues, I always mention the family dinners, the role of family dinners. I mean, there is evidence. Columbia University has done quite a bit of studies on this, where they show clearly that with respect to teenagers, the probability of them using drugs, having problems with the law, having problems academically, are all reduced significantly, statistically significantly, when the family eats as family frequently, and frequently is between 5 to 7 times a week. So the frequent of family dinners is one of these basic elements. But what for me is fascinating is I can give you all the numbers and the policy and analysis and the forecast, but the one thing that everybody remembers is Dr. Aguirre. I went home and I told my wife, we need to eat together again. Right?
Beautiful.
Family dinners is powerful. And how we use technology. I think we need to learn, right? And we need to teach. Nothing happens if you are not watching your phone all the time. Nothing happens if you go down the street thinking instead of just looking at your watch. And definitely, please say hello to people and speak with your neighbor instead of being on your phone. If you remember a couple of years ago, the Surgeon General said that the most important medical crisis in the United States was isolation. And for me, what was fascinating is, wow, somebody is talking solid economics. Right. But not only that, when I read, because I really was curious about what was going to be his recommendation, right, for the United States population, and it was common sense, right? The recommendation was eat with your family. Go out and say hello to your neighbor. Yeah, it was basic, normal, but anybody would have said, at least of my age, normal way of living, right? You say hello to people, you spend time with your community, you get engaged in your community, whether it is the church, is the community center, your school. We are talking just basic normal life, and that was a recommendation, right?
What I love about being Catholic is that we're so sacramental, right? It's what we do with our soul, we should do with our bodies, right? That's what we have confession, it's what we have the Eucharist. And I think that technology is taking that away from us. We're forgetting that we are corporal, that what we do with our body matters. And it's not enough. As you said, it's beautiful that we can communicate with technology, but that's not enough. We need in person.
We need to be person-centered. Mm-hmm. And we are bodies, we just don't have them. This is why I think how we live, even in our spiritual dimension, has economic consequences, right? That's why we need moral capital, and we call it capital, right? Moral capital in a society, in an economy to be operational. So I always repeat this, we are bodies, we just don't have them, right? When you are joyful, you smile. When you are tense, you have a headache, your stomach, all type of problems happen, right? I mean, we are bodies. And therefore, everything has an economic dimension. right?
But I think the downside of that is that our bodies feel, right? Our bodies can feel very deeply. And so I think sometimes we lean on these distractions, these technologies to avoid. And I
Correct.
think that
Takes us away from reality.
exactly. And so I think that's why you see the families that are at dinner at Olive Garden and all of them are on their phones or an iPad. It's because it's scary to confront each other. It's scary to have the conflicts that are going to come up and should come up, right? Because they teach us conflict resolution in the family.
But it's scary, and yet it's a wonderful adventure, and it's a joyful one. I think that this is why is one of the problems. I think technology or this world that is not real, right? The cyber world that we have created has is that we think that good reality has to be perfect, and in reality, that's not true. Good reality doesn't need to be perfect. Now, growing up, whenever I would get upset, my mother would say, "Honey, if everybody would be the same, the world would be extremely boring." And as I grew up, I realized the wisdom of those words, right? It's precisely in the differences, in the different skills, capacity, talents that we share in our world,
Right.
that we find interested, adventure, something worth it to live for. And I think that's what the youth is seeking today. I mean, as you know, these past years, the church has experienced unexpected numbers of people coming into the Catholic Church, and the age continues to go down. And why? As somebody who has been in academia for 30 years, I tell you, the youth wants answers. And my generation has capitulated on them. We think, they cannot think, oh, they're useless, they blah. When in reality, they have lots to contribute, is that we need to take them seriously. And part of taking them seriously is making their leave their responsibility, because they are free. They are also responsible. And we cannot be afraid, right? They are afraid. We cannot be afraid. And that's how we learn, right? That's the wonderful gift of freedom, because otherwise we cannot laugh, and goes back full circle to the family, right? If we are not free, we cannot love.
Absolutely. I've had the privilege and the gift of being put in positions throughout my life that maybe I wasn't fully ready for at different times. And I've had amazing people older than me who say, I believe in you. You can do it. And it's, as you said, the human experience is hard. It's a struggle. And when an organism ceases to struggle, it's because it's dead, right? So,
That's
and
right.
we have to continue to put ourselves in situations and, as you said, allow the young people to put themselves in situations that are hard and say, I believe in you. Let me walk with you in this. And then we can build up a new
And we learn so much. I
Yeah.
think that that's one of the gifts that has been in my profession, has been every class I learn from my students.
That's beautiful.
Every time, because the young generations bring so much wealth in the way they look at things, expand your horizons, and vice versa. That's why we are intertemporal, we are intergenerational, and we are relational, right?
Absolutely. So, this podcast, it will be watched by many students at Catholic International University. Many of them might be young, unmarried. What is your advice for them as we talk about the family unit, as we talk about marriage, to walk into these relationships and to build strong families?
Well, first of all, I think is take the people around you seriously. Get to know them. Open yourself. It's fine to be vulnerable. It is great to be vulnerable, because without that, there's no relations. Number two, put away that phone. Enjoy reality. Don't let technology, that can be very helpful, dehumanize you. And three, spend time in family dinners. Again, throughout history and across cultures, dinners have always been a point of encounter and of welcoming. Spend time. Don't go to so many restaurants. receive people in your home, open your home. It doesn't need to be perfect, but spend time. I think those would be my first three tops. And the third is read.
Mm.
Read.
Absolutely. It's so true. And I think that really ties us back to courage, right? It's like you said, it takes courage to be vulnerable. It takes courage to open up your home and think, maybe it's not I haven't decorated it enough, or, maybe I don't know if I will know what to say, right? That takes courage, but that's how we grow and it's how we build our foundation. So I think that's amazing. What is the future for Catholic International University in terms of integrated economics?
Well, I think we will be in the next 3 years launching economics, the Department of Integral Economics in our school. But we really want to be that force for good that help people across the world access quality education in a person-centered way that is rigorous and that is online, right? That is reachable for those who have no alternative to quality education and in a flexible and very affordable way. So that's our future.
Yeah.
We hope with that to advance right into strengthen the economy of many countries because we will be strengthening the human capital and social capital.
That's one of the pieces of our mission that's so close to my heart is that we can reach anybody, anywhere. And these truths, whether it be, through the future of our department in integral economics or, our current teaching, a foundation of our teaching, which is Catholic social thought,
Correct.
which has these same sustaining truths and we can bring them anywhere to build these strong communities. So
no, people are thirsty for what we have to offer, and certainly Catholic International is on the move to reach them. So that's where we are up to.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I have learned so much. And so I'm so grateful that you came and that you spoke to us today. I also am just so thankful for all the work that you're doing at Catholic International. We are just so blessed to have you, and we can't wait to see the future at Catholic International with you as president. So,
well, as you know, it's not me, it's a team. So
thank you.
Go team. Thank you.